So it's time now to go deeper and go deeper in God's word, which is always a good thing, as cliched and as corny as that might sound. Let me just read these scriptures because they're so good on their own, and God's word is good. So this is James chapter 1, verses 2 through to 8, and this is the NIV. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Now, endurance, we're always thinking about spiritual exercise and physical exercise. So this part of being double-minded and unstable, when I was out mountain biking the other day, it was freezing cold. So there's lots of surface mud, and you get just like a tiny scratch below the mud, and yet you've got ice. So the mud and soil is just compacted. And where the tractors and Land Rover or whatever have been through, it's hard. It's like a wall. So you go in there and you got a bit of mud, and then you catch a bit of ice. And every so often it is just mud, but most of it was ice because it was quite early. And the thing is, you have to make a decision. You're either going to go where the wheel's going to tell you to go, or you're going to fight the rut. And sometimes you can fight the rut, but most times you lose. And I fought the rut a few times, and I lost every time. So what I had to come up to the conclusion of was, if I'm riding along and I've got a bit of a rut in front of me where it's gone right down, and you've always got a U shape in the road, you've either got to go with it, or you're going to fall off. And when you're riding along and there's a bit slightly on a slope, and I started to go and I was fighting against the slope and I was fighting against gravity, and I fell off quite a lot of times. So what I had to do was stop fighting what I couldn't change, because I can't do anything about the solid wall that my tyre is bouncing up against on the mountain bike. If I go at a certain angle, maybe I can get it, but try and go along it. It's a really hard thing to do. So you've got to be flexible, and this struck me as I was mountain biking the other day. Here's another thing about being flexible. We're going along the road that we want to go, and then we get unemployed. We've been unemployed more than once, sadly. It's part of reality, and this is before COVID. And we were unemployed, and it was really hard, and we had rent to pay. Our landlord was really lovely about it, but we had no money, and we lost our job. And we didn't have any benefits. We weren't in a job long enough that we could get lots more money. So we put a thing on Facebook saying, please, guys, what do? We need some prayer. We didn't ask for money. We just asked for help. But what happened is it gave an opportunity for others to bless us with money, others to bless us with some love and some prayer and support. And it built up relationships and trust between people, because in our difficulty, we went through it. And I thought, well, that's a bit pointless. All we've done is they've given us a bit of money or some food. But at the end of all that, they came back and said, wow, you know what? Walking with you and watching you through that journey, we learnt faith because you didn't give up on God through all the stuff that was going on. So sometimes we go through something and we wonder why. It's very encouraging when we hear at the end, do you know what? That difficulty you went through actually encouraged me. And we've had that quite a few times when stuff's come along and people have said, do you know what, Andy, you and your family, you stick close to Christ. You don't give up, you keep faithful. And it encourages other people. We're on the floor at this point. We're struggling, but people are really encouraged by it. So here's another one for you. Cycling up the Longmin, which is a massive mountain in Shropshire. I was there one day and I was going to cycle up a hill. Now, it turns out later I discovered that some people use this particular part of the hill as a race occasionally, and quite often at the top of this hill there are numerous ambulances when it's race day with lots of oxygen, and when the cyclists get to the top they take oxygen. I wasn't very fit, it wasn't a race day, there was no ambulance, and I cycled up this hill because I asked the bike shop the quickest way home many years ago, and they said, well, go straight up the hill. Well, isn't there like a flatter way? No, he said, because that's the only way. So I went up this hill, and it took me about 24 stops up the hill. Didn't walk, I cycled from the bottom to the top, but there were lots of people seeing me stop, and I'd get so far and cycle and I'd stop. First gear I needed like 20 gears below it, so I got so far and I'd stop, and people were giving me a round of applause and cheering me on, and it encouraged me to go on. It was amazing. And 23 stops later or so I got to the top of the hill. Coming down the other side was great fun. I had to be flexible. I had a choice. I could give up. I could call Joe and come and pick me up. I could get on a bus. I could walk. But I wanted to cycle, and that was my goal. So I cycled up the hill. And it was really tough. But the people who were encouraging me, stopping their cars and clapping and shouting and cheering, got me up the hill. It was really cool. And that's a really good memory that we need to encourage one another when we're struggling. People might not be getting as they want to. I wanted to go from the top to the bottom in one go. Didn't want to stop 23 times. Stopping 23 times got me up the hill, being flexible. So, God never lets us cope with more than we can handle. And here's the important bit. With him. It's a really old phrase. It's really wrong. God never gives us more than we can handle. Absolute rubbish. God never gives us more to cope with him than we can handle, because then we're not coping with it on our own. We're coping with God, and God is bigger than everything. One last thing. Let's just dive into 2 Corinthians 4. Verse 8. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. The life in me of Jesus Christ going up that hill was very evident because I was breathing. I was not on oxygen. So, we are walking with Christ. We won't have to face anything that we can't handle with God. It may be more than we can handle, but it's never more than he can handle, because he's God and God is amazing. So let's remember who God is. Let's remember that we're not going to have to face life with stuff that we can't deal with. If we've got Christ in our life, we will get through the problems. But here's the thing, we have to get through the problems. To get from the bottom of that hill on the long main to the top, there wasn't a train, there wasn't a conveyor belt, there wasn't a car, there was no medical assistance, although I probably needed it by the top. I had to keep going, but God got me up that hill. I was singing psalms in my head and hymns and whatever else I could think of, and eventually I got to the top. Sometimes it'll take 23 stops to get from where we're going to where we're trying to get to, but let's do it with Jesus Christ in our life, because however hard it is physically or spiritually, he's walking alongside us, he's walking along before us, behind us. God is amazing. Let's trust in him today.